He thought he was pushing me out of a room. In reality, he was pushing me toward a door he didn't even know existed. 30 days later, in a silent conference room scented with coffee and panic, a single line in the patent registry would turn his certainty into ash. The morning he told me to leave, the office smelled like burnt espresso and impatience. Light from the floor-to-ceiling windows fell in sharp rectangles across the glass conference table, dividing the room into clean corporate geometry. He stood at the head of it, sleeves rolled, jaw tight, performing authority like it was a language he'd been born fluent in. "If you're not happy, get out," he snapped. It wasn't loud. That was the worst part. It was measured, surgical. As if my dissatisfaction were a clerical error he could correct with a single keystroke. Around the table, our team pretended to review quarterly projections. No one looked at me. The silence had weight. It pressed against my ribs. I felt small for exactly 3 seconds. Then something else replaced it. Clarity, thin and bright as winter air. He thought I was unhappy because I wasn't grateful, that I should be thankful to have my name buried in footnotes while his dominated slides. He mistook quiet for compliance. He mistook patience for dependence. That was his first error. The second was assuming I had nothing of my own. I gathered my notebook slowly, as if this were just another meeting wrapping up. The cover was soft leather, worn at the corners. Inside it lived 3 years of sketches, formulas, refinements, late nights stitched together with fluorescent light and stubbornness. I had never left it on my desk. I had never uploaded the final architecture to the shared server. I had learned early that brilliance without protection becomes someone else's promotion. As I walked out, my badge still worked. The doors parted with obedient silence. A few heads turned in the open office, quick glances, then back to screens. Slack notifications flickered like nervous birds. The world did not collapse. The printer still hummed. Someone laughed near the kitchenette. Corporate life has a remarkable talent for continuing. In the elevator, alone at last, I allowed myself one steady breath. My reflection looked composed, too composed. I expected anger, humiliation, something cinematic. Instead, I felt aligned, like a compass snapping into true north. Because the truth was this: the core algorithm behind our flagship product, the one investors whispered about in hushed excitement, had never belonged to the company. It belonged to me, not in theory, not emotionally, legally. Months earlier, when the first prototype showed promise, I had done what engineers rarely romanticize but always need: paperwork, quiet consultations, careful filings. I'd spent lunch breaks in a different building across town, sitting in a narrow office where diplomas lined the wall like disciplined soldiers. The patent registry doesn't care about office politics. It cares about timestamps. "Document everything," the IP council had said, tapping the folder with deliberate calm. "And don't announce what you don't have to." I hadn't announced anything. Back in the present, the elevator chimed at the lobby. I stepped into the marble coolness of the reception area. The security guard gave me a sympathetic nod. Word travels fast when it tastes like drama. I handed over my badge with a polite smile. Outside, the city moved with indifferent grace. Buses exhaled at curbs. Wind tugged at my coat. I didn't look back at the building, though I felt it looming behind me. Steel and glass and certainty. My phone vibrated before I reached the corner. A message from him. "We'll discuss your exit paperwork. HR will follow up. So tidy, so procedural, as if I were a subscription being canceled." I typed nothing. Instead, I opened a different thread, a short one, only a handful of messages exchanged over months. The last unread notification blinked patiently. "Your provisional filing has been accepted. Confirmation attached. The attachment icon glowed like a small, contained sun. I paused at the crosswalk, pedestrians clustering around me. Somewhere above, a construction crane rotated slowly against the pale sky. Change does not roar, it pivots quietly. He believed I had left with empty hands. He had never asked what I was holding. The light turned green. I stepped forward, blending into the current of strangers, carrying something far heavier and far more valuable than a cardboard box of desk plants. And in a sealed digital vault within the patent registry, my name waited where his never would. If he had looked closer at the foundations he was standing on, he might have noticed they weren't registered to the company at all. But he didn't look, not yet. The first week after I left, the silence was almost luxurious. No calendar invites, no passive-aggressive quick syncs, no carefully neutral emails looping 10 people into conversations that required 2. My apartment, usually just a place to sleep between battles, became a laboratory of thought. Morning light pooled across my kitchen table, illuminating stacks of annotated diagrams and a laptop that no longer connected to the company VPN. They expected me to scramble, to send regretful messages, to negotiate my return at a discount. Instead, I scheduled a meeting, not with him, with IP counsel. The office was quieter than I remembered, tucked between a dental clinic and a travel agency that advertised tropical certainty. Inside, the air carried the scent of paper and discretion. Diplomas framed in dark wood lined the walls like silent witnesses. When I sat down, I placed my notebook, my real asset, on the polished desk between us. "We're moving from provisional to full filing," I said. The attorney studied me over steepled fingers. "You're certain?" "I've never been more certain." Outside that window, traffic rolled past in indifferent waves. Inside, we reviewed timelines, claims, extensions. Every paragraph was a brick, every signature a lock turning softly in place. Protection is not dramatic. It is deliberate. 2 days later, my former team launched a beta update. I watched the announcement from my couch, tea cooling untouched in my hand. The product demo was slick, confident, full of phrases I had once drafted in the margins of whiteboards. He stood on stage, measured, charismatic, persuasive. Investors nodded. Applause rippled like obedient rain. And then he described the proprietary core architecture. My architecture, there it was. Not copied line for line. He wasn't reckless, but structurally identical. The same spine, the same elegant compression sequence that reduced processing time by half, the same cascading logic tree that I had refined across 3 winters. My phone buzzed again. A former colleague. "Did you see the demo?" I typed back. "Yes." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. "Is that yours?" I stared at the screen. There is a strange calm that arrives when suspicion transforms into confirmation. Anger would have been easier. Anger burns fast. What I felt was colder, steadier. "It's registered," I replied. The response came almost instantly. "Registered?" I didn't elaborate. That evening, I forwarded the demo recording to IP counsel with a single sentence, "For your review." The reply arrived before midnight. "We'll compare claims. Do not contact them." I wouldn't have. The following week, rumors began circulating in industry forums. Anonymous posts questioning originality. Subtle, careful, phrased like curiosity rather than accusation. Investors are allergic to uncertainty. It spreads invisibly. Meanwhile, a certified envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside, a formal notice from the company's legal department. A restrained but unmistakable warning regarding confidential information and post-employment obligations. I read it once, twice, then I smiled. They were afraid. Not because I had spoken, I hadn't. Not because I had acted publicly. I hadn't done that either. They were afraid because somewhere in their due diligence, someone had searched the patent registry and found my name. I scheduled another meeting with IP counsel. "We expected this," the attorney said calmly, sliding the notice back across the desk. "They're testing boundaries. And boundaries hold when they're properly built." We prepared a response, polite, precise, citing filing dates, referencing documentation, no accusations, no drama, just facts aligned like dominoes, waiting for gravity. Days passed, then came the invitation, a private discussion at headquarters, their general counsel, 2 senior executives, him. I almost declined, not out of fear, but because I understood leverage. Meetings are currency. Timing is power. I accepted. The building looked the same when I returned, glass gleaming, lobby echoing with ambition. Yet something subtle had shifted. Reception greeted me with forced brightness. My visitor badge printed more slowly than I remembered. In the conference room, the atmosphere was heavier than before. Coffee cups untouched, screens dark. He didn't meet my eyes at first. Their counsel began with formalities. "We've noticed a filing under your name." "Yes," I said evenly. They referenced internal resources, collaborative environments, shared development cycles. The implication was delicate but clear. They were suggesting co-ownership. I listened without interrupting. Then I opened my folder, time-stamped drafts, independent hardware purchases, cloud accounts funded from my personal card, emails where I had explicitly outlined separable modules, my provisional filing receipt. Silence thickened. Their counsel cleared his throat. "This complicates things. Not for me." He finally looked at me then. Not angry, not dismissive, uncertain. It was subtle, but it was there, the first fracture in his certainty. We adjourned without resolution. "We'll be in touch," they said. As I stepped back into the elevator, I realized something critical. This was no longer about whether I had built something valuable. It was about whether they could afford not to acknowledge it. And in rooms where valuations are whispered in 8 figures, acknowledgement has a price. That night, industry chatter grew louder. An investor postponed a scheduled media appearance. A tech blog hinted at ownership complexities behind a rising product star. My phone remained quiet. I didn't need noise. I needed timing. Because somewhere inside their legal department, someone was preparing to open the official patent registry again, this time not as curiosity, but as necessity. And when they did, the line they'd skimmed before would read very differently. If you think this is where the balance tips, you're watching too early. The real shift hasn't even begun. Subscribe to follow the next move, because timing, not anger, is about to change everything. The notice from their counsel arrived 3 days after our meeting. Not aggressive, not apologetic, controlled. They proposed a collaborative resolution, a phrase polished smooth by decades of corporate negotiation. Translation: they had finally measured the cost of ignoring me. Outside my apartment window, rain threaded silver lines down the glass, blurring the city into something impressionistic and uncertain. I read the document slowly, letting each clause settle. Joint venture, licensing structure, revenue share, language designed to make surrender look strategic. I closed the laptop because the truth was simpler than their paragraphs. They needed what they did not own. Meanwhile, the industry blogs sharpened their tone. What had begun as whispers matured into analysis. Screenshots from the patent registry circulated in private investor chats. My filing date glowed in monochrome authority. It didn't accuse, it didn't editorialize, it simply existed. And existence, when documented, is power. IP Council called that afternoon. They're feeling pressure. How much? A funding round doesn't close cleanly with unresolved IP questions. I let that sit between us. Pressure is most useful when you don't rush to release it. We scheduled mediation. The conference facility they chose overlooked the river, a symbolic gesture perhaps. Neutral ground, soft carpets, art that meant nothing and everything, the kind of space designed to convince people they are being reasonable. He arrived 10 minutes late, not dramatically, just enough to suggest control. His suit was darker than usual, his expression more contained. He nodded at me like one acknowledges a former colleague at an industry gala. Professional, distant. We took our seats. Their side spoke first. We value the contributions you made during your time with us. Contributions? A careful downgrade from creation. I folded my hands on the table. The registered patent outlines my contributions clearly. A pause. They proposed numbers, significant, impressive even. Enough to make headlines if framed correctly. A buyout, structured with performance incentives, confidentiality clauses woven through like fine print lace. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel the temptation, not greed, resolution, to end it cleanly, to step away with a figure that would silence any lingering doubt about whether leaving had been wise. Then I remembered the meeting, the snap in his voice, the assumption that my dissatisfaction equaled disposability. I wasn't here for revenge, I was here for accuracy. Ownership isn't transferable under pressure, I said calmly, but licensing is negotiable. The room shifted. Their counsel leaned forward. You're suggesting a structured license, market rate. Non-exclusive. His eyes flickered. Non-exclusive. Meaning they could use it. But so could I. Meaning their competitive edge would no longer be singular. Silence stretched. The river outside moved steadily, indifferent to strategy. He finally spoke. You'd undermine the product. No, I replied. I'd diversify it. The difference mattered. Negotiations extended for hours, offers recalibrated, percentages adjusted, clauses tightened. My attorney's pen moved with quiet precision, crossing out language that implied subordination, reinforcing language that preserved autonomy. By evening, no agreement had been signed, but something more valuable had been established. They understood that I was not an emotional variable. I was a registered fact. 2 days later, another tremor ran through their ecosystem. An internal memo leaked, not by me, not by design, but by inevitability. It acknowledged ongoing licensing discussions with the patent holder. The patent holder. Not former employee, not collaborator, holder. My phone filled with messages from recruiters, founders, venture partners, polite inquiries, curious invitations. One message stood out. If you're exploring partnerships, we'd like to talk. Opportunity does not knock loudly. It rearranges the air until you notice the door. I scheduled conversations carefully, not all at once, not impulsively. The algorithm I built was elegant because it solved inefficiency. Why would I manage my own leverage inefficiently? A week later, mediation resumed. This time, their tone had shifted from negotiation to alignment. They agreed to a licensing framework. Market rate, clear attribution, no ownership transfer. The document would reflect reality. When the final draft was placed before me, I didn't rush to sign. I read every line, not searching for traps, but honoring the journey that had brought me here. From a conference room where I was told to leave, to a table where my name defined terms. I signed. He watched. There was no apology. None was needed, because the victory wasn't theatrical. It was structural. As we stood to leave, he spoke quietly. You could have handled this differently. I met his gaze. So could you. Outside, the rain had stopped. The city shimmered under clean light. Reflections sharpened. Edges clarified. The license would be filed with the patent registry within days. Public record, transparent, undeniable, and once it was, the market would see exactly who owned the foundation. The real recalibration was about to begin. Not loud, not explosive, but permanent. The filing went live on a Tuesday at 9:17 a.m. There was no ceremony, no bell ringing, just a quiet update inside the patent registry database, an amended public record reflecting a structured license agreement between the company and the patent holder. Owner, her, licensee, them. 2 lines. That was all it took to redraw the architecture of power. By 10:03 a.m., investor Slack channels had screenshots. By noon, a tech columnist published a cautious but pointed article about a founder-level patent holder behind the product's core engine. By mid-afternoon, the company's stock, so recently buoyant with optimism, wavered, not dramatically, but perceptibly. Markets dislike ambiguity even more than they dislike competition. Inside their headquarters, I imagined the air felt thinner. My phone rang. Not recruiters this time, journalists. I declined interviews. Silence, I had learned, magnifies curiosity more effectively than commentary. Every unanswered question expands in the public imagination. And I had no interest in humiliating anyone. This wasn't spectacle, it was alignment. Instead, I accepted a meeting across town. Glass walls, minimalist decor, a startup team with restless intelligence and eyes that gleamed when they talked about solving inefficiency in global supply chains. They had read the filing carefully. They understood what non-exclusive meant. "You're free," their CTO said, almost reverently. "Yes," I replied. "I am." We discussed collaboration, not acquisition, not employment, collaboration, equity structured around contribution, transparent governance, attribution in plain language, not buried in footnotes. For the first time in months, excitement moved through me unaccompanied by tension. It felt like oxygen reaching a room long sealed. Meanwhile, at my former company, the narrative shifted carefully. Press releases emphasized strategic licensing partnerships. Internal memos praised forward-thinking IP frameworks. The story was being rewritten, not to erase me, but to normalize me. It was almost elegant. A week later, I received a calendar invite from him. Subject line, coffee? I considered ignoring it. Closure is often overrated, but curiosity is powerful, and I prefer clarity over speculation. We met at a cafe near the river, neutral ground again. Sunlight fractured through leaves overhead, scattering gold across the table between us. He looked different, less certain, not diminished, just recalibrated. "I underestimated you," he said without preamble. There it was, not an apology, not quite admiration, recognition. "You underestimated documentation," I replied lightly. A flicker of a smile. He stirred his coffee, though he hadn't added sugar. "The board respects how this was handled. Handled, as if I diffused something volatile." "I didn't set out to create conflict," I said. "I set out to protect what I built." He nodded slowly. "They're restructuring leadership roles." I didn't ask what that meant for him. It wasn't necessary. Corporate ecosystems adjust when foundations shift, titles become fluid, influence redistributes itself quietly. "I hope the product thrives," I added, and I meant it. He studied me for a long moment. "You're partnering elsewhere." It wasn't a question. "Yes." A beat of silence passed, filled only by the low hum of conversation around us. Finally, he exhaled. "You walked out like you had nothing to lose." I met his gaze steadily. I walked out because I knew what I had already secured. Understanding settled between us like evening light, soft, undeniable. We parted without tension. Later that night, I stood by my window overlooking the city. Traffic moved in luminous streams below, each car carrying someone certain of their direction, or pretending to be. My laptop screen glowed with a draft roadmap for the new collaboration. Lines of code, strategic outlines, timelines. Freedom isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It reveals itself in choices. The choice to leave, the choice to file, the choice to remain calm when pressured, the choice to build again, this time without shrinking. Somewhere across the city, a company continued operating on technology they now properly licensed. Investors adjusted expectations, leadership adapted, and me? I was no longer reacting, I was designing. But the final shift, the one that would quietly redefine reputations beyond balance sheets, was still approaching. The award invitation arrived in a thin envelope that looked deceptively modest. Innovation Summit, Keynote Panel, Architects Behind the Algorithms. I almost declined. Public recognition had never been my objective. My satisfaction came from blueprints aligning with reality, from systems working cleanly under pressure. But something about the phrasing lingered. Architects, plural, not figureheads, not founders, architects. The event took place in a restored industrial hall where steel beams met warm, amber light. Conversations hummed like circuitry. Screens displayed product demos in elegant loops. My name appeared on the program beneath the title of my patent, printed without embellishment. Registered owner. Across the room, I saw him, not on stage, not framed by branding. In the audience. He nodded once when our eyes met. It wasn't awkward, it wasn't triumphant, it was simply accurate. The ecosystem had corrected itself. When my turn came, I stepped onto the stage without notes. They asked about resilience, about navigating conflict, about what it felt like to win. I chose my words carefully. I didn't win, I said. I documented. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through the hall. I built something, I protected it, and when misalignment happened, I relied on structure, not volume. The moderator leaned forward. What would you tell someone who feels underestimated? I paused. Outside the tall windows, evening settled over the city in slow gradients of blue. Inside, hundreds of faces waited, not for drama, but for direction. I'd tell them to separate emotion from evidence, I said. If you've created something of value, secure it. Not defensively, intelligently. Recognition is unpredictable. Documentation isn't. After the panel, founders approached with questions about filings, licensing frameworks, ownership clarity. Engineers asked about balancing collaboration with protection. No one asked about revenge, because there hadn't been any. Weeks later, the new partnership launched its first product iteration built on my licensed core. Optimized, expanded, unmistakably evolved. Attribution appeared in plain language within the technical brief. No footnotes, no ambiguity. Industry coverage shifted subtly. Instead of framing me as the employee who sued, which I never did, they described me as the engineer whose early patent redefined ownership norms in collaborative tech environments. Reputation, I learned, is not defended loudly. It is shaped by consistency. One quiet afternoon, I received a final notification from the patent registry. Confirmation of international extension approvals. Additional territories secured. Broader protection. The digital certificate shimmered on my screen with bureaucratic elegance. I closed the laptop and allowed myself a long breath. A month ago, I had walked out of a conference room under fluorescent lights, dismissed with a sentence meant to reduce me. If you're not happy, get out. He thought the door led to absence. It led to authorship. The company still thrives. The product still scales. Investors still calculate projections in tidy columns. But every time counsel opens the registry, during audits, negotiations, expansions, they see it. Owner, her. Not as retaliation. Not as a scar. As record. And records, unlike tempers, do not fade.